Dear colleagues, dear friends, dear fellow feminists, I'm Tamil Kendall. I'm the technical lead of the Action Coalition on Bodily Autonomy and Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you here today for this Action Coalition dialogue session, where we get to share the work that we've been doing with the world for the very first time. So I'll just orient you to a few of the technical functions of our Zoom session today. So you'll see that translation is available. Click the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and select the language that you would like to listen in for the session. And also there's a question and answer function that you can use to submit any questions to the speakers. So with that little technical piece out of the way, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Sarah Hendricks, the Director of Program Policy and Intergovernmental Division at UN Women and the Action Coalition co-lead. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Tamil, and thank you to everybody for joining today's exciting conversation on the Action Coalition for Bodily Autonomy and Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights. I'd like to begin today's session by highlighting the journey that we have been on to date and what a remarkable journey it has been. The Action Coalition leaders and partners have come together today in Mexico City, virtually of course, in order to kick off the Action Coalitions and their draft blueprints. And today is indeed a milestone reflective of a journey that goes back not just weeks, not just months, but some years of planning. And I'd like to remind us all that the journey began with a very simple fact, that 26 years now after the Beijing Platform for Action, not a single country has achieved gender equality. And there is a pressing need to go from words to real, funded, and game-changing concrete action. And this is all the more critical in the context of COVID-19, which has exacerbated the lack of progress, deepened women's poverty, and with specific impacts on women's health and well-being. The journey that you see before you indeed started with that ambition in mind and was envisaged as a global, multi-stakeholder and innovative platform poised to build a more equal, inclusive, and sustainable world with gender equality at its heart. This vision of the Action Coalitions began by identifying 6 critical themes and inspiring a co-creative, highly dynamic process to advance a blueprint for action on each theme. The theme of bodily autonomy and sexual and reproductive health and rights is indeed one of the core issues that the Action Coalitions have focused on. Over the past many, many months, 95 plus leaders across youth-led organizations, civil society, governments from the global north and south, as well as the private sector and international organizations have come together through a set of design sprints, Action Coalition workshops, dialogues in order to build out a perspective of the game-changing actions that could drive forward and accelerate progress on bodily autonomy and sexual and reproductive health and rights. And so today, is when we will, in this part of the journey, see the unveiling of these draft actions and the perspective of tactics and strategies that will advance concrete change. Today is also a critical moment because the Action Coalition on Bodily Autonomy and Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights will not only amplify these actions as part of a global acceleration plan on gender equality, but will call for other stakeholders to join this effort in terms of driving clear commitments. I just want to conclude by sharing this short journey by thanking everybody, all the leaders from across this Action Coalition, and indeed all of you who have come to the conversation in today's dialogue, for the work you are doing every day to design this transformative vision to advance and accelerate bold and groundbreaking change for women's and girls' lives. Thank you so much. And back over to you, Tamil, to advance us to our next steps in the agenda.
Thank you very much, Sarah. The next step in our agenda is to welcome Deputy Executive Director Åsa Regner of UN Women to give some opening remarks. Please, Deputy Executive Director, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me here today, and thank you everybody, panelists and everybody joining in today for doing so. And Sarah, I have to say it's lovely to see you. We have the whole CSW behind us, so we have been talking a lot in other ways, but we haven't really been at the same place at the same time for a long time because we've had so much going on. So I want to also thank the UN Women team for pulling so much off during a very busy time. But I think that shows that we're all really committed to doing more. And coming out of the Commission on the Status of Women, I think it's extremely important that we have the intergovernmental track where all member states come together, they discuss what they've done, they discuss what they need to do, and they, as this year, come out with conclusions on what they should do in future. However, we know that process is not perfect because it is lacking. There is a gap between the commitments on paper and what is actually happening in reality. And that's why UN Women took the initiative to the Generation Equality Forum for those of us from countries, governments, from civil society, from the UN system, from the private sector, from the youth, from youth activists who wanted to come together and push for implementation. And I'm really happy that that is what we're discussing now. So I want to thank all of you who've been part of the Action Coalition, all the leaders and everybody else who've been engaging in this. I know it's been a long, I think often fun, sometimes complicated journey that has also required a lot of patience from many of you and of us. But now we are here in Mexico, and I'm actually very happy about that. Sexual reproductive health and rights are very important rights. And coming out of the Commission on the Status of Women, as you all know, we know that there is still a lot of resistance to this particular part of the gender equality agenda from some parts of the member state group. I think it's very important for us not to describe this agenda as a sensitive agenda or something like that. I think that we risk making these rights relative, if you see what I mean. They are not, they are rights. And we want to discuss now how to go further and how to implement them. We knew already before the COVID crisis that access to sexual and reproductive health and rights was a key challenge for women and girls across the world, since only a bit more than half of married or in union adolescents and women make their own decisions regarding sexual and reproductive health and rights. As much as 190 million women of a reproductive age who wanted to avoid pregnancy did not use any contraceptive method in 2019. And we know that preventable complications of pregnancy, childbirth, birth, and AIDS remain the top causes of death and disability for girls and women of reproductive age globally. And we know that all of this, as I said, is preventable. So guaranteeing bodily autonomy and access to sexual and reproductive health and rights is fundamental for gender equality and the exercise of all other rights. Bodily autonomy and sexual and reproductive health and rights means that if you have that control, you can also participate in education, work, political decisions, and you can control your own life to a much larger extent. As you will hear later, all of you have been part of defining a blueprint with the concrete actions proposed from all of us. And we want to ensure that many more million girls, adolescent girls and women in all their diversity can access these essential rights, such as the right to information and education, the right to choose whether to have children, the right to choose the number and spacing of their children, and to make all these choices in conditions of equality and for them to be free from coercion, violence, and discrimination. I also wanted to say that I really hope we can discuss this. We need to take actions and not discuss perhaps so much. And I don't want us to go back to the analysis too much. I want us to focus on implementation. But in doing so, I think it's important in order to contribute to reaching the SDGs in 2030 or in 2030 to focus on the fact that these are big issues of inequality. It has to do with inequality. Those who suffer most if we deny these rights are Black women, indigenous women, women in conflict zones, women who don't have resources themselves. Rich women, to be very edgy, can get access to safe abortions, to contraceptives, to what they want in almost all circumstances, because there is a market. But if you don't have those resources or contacts or information, those are the women who suffer the most and sometimes even pay with their lives. And I think that argument has to come in. It's an inequality issue. You all know that, but I think we have to make that argument even stronger. So thank you everybody for being here today. I really look forward to discussing with you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Deputy Executive Director. Now it is my extreme pleasure to introduce Kate Hampton, of the Chief Executive Officer of the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, or also known as CIFF. Kate became the CEO of CIFF in March 2016, having run CIFF's climate change team since 2009. CIFF is the world's largest philanthropy that is focused exclusively on children and works with partners across the globe on reproductive health, girls' education, child health, and climate change. Kate's career prior to CIFF spans a number of strategic roles in government, finance, consulting, at think tanks, and with NGOs. And we're delighted to have CIFF as our philanthropy lead in the Action Coalition and to have Kate here with us today as our moderator. Please, Kate, I'm handing the floor over to you.
Thanks so much, Tamil, and it's been lovely listening to the introductions, and I'm hugely excited, obviously, to be part of this session, as well as part of the Action Coalition more broadly. And it's pretty clear from all that we've heard so far that Generation Equality Forum offers a huge opportunity to make critical progress on the issues related to sexual reproductive health and rights that are holding back women and girls in all their diversity all over the world. I'd like to thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you all today. And I'm going to introduce the vision of success of the Action Coalition. And while I'm doing that, I've been asked to remind all the speakers to turn off their videos when they're not speaking. Thank you. So together with the other co-leads, many of whom are present here, we've been working diligently, as you would imagine, over the last few months to develop a joint vision and a set of key actions that we believe will transform women and girls' sexual reproductive health and rights over the next 5 years. yesterday, and from our speakers already, we've heard about the challenges women and girls face accessing their sexual reproductive health services and exercising their rights, and how that's been made all the more difficult during the pandemic. But we're also hearing stories of hope and causes for optimism. And I hope that the vision of success will be part of that. So you can see from the slide in front of you, and we're going to have a poll on it in a minute, the key elements of our vision: empowerment, freedom from coercion, violence and discrimination, accessible high quality information, and the transformation of social norms, leaving no one behind. So I'm going to present the poll, and we want briefly to get everyone's views on the vision that you've just seen. So I hope you've all committed it to memory. But what we're really interested in hearing is, what is the most important part of the vision to you? And what do you think is going to provide the most hope for transformation in the near term? So you should see a poll in front of you. The poll should show the options of empowerment, freedom from coercion, information, and the opportunities to work together. So if everybody could vote, please, and we'll come to the results in a second. So the results are in, and the winner is freedom from coercion, discrimination and violence, with 42% of the votes. Access to information was very close behind, with over a third of the votes, and empowerment and working together significantly less. So freedom from coercion, discrimination and violence, and high quality information are seen as the two most important issues set out in our vision, but I know you all appreciate the other ones. It's a difficult choice to make. So thank you for that. If we could, there's going to be opportunities to do polls throughout. So we'll be keeping you on your toes, and you'll have an opportunity to share your opinions with everyone and with the panelists. So the next slide, please, is an important one. So I think we've already heard from some of the speakers about the challenges that are faced, and this just puts some data to those challenges. So 45% of girls, nearly half of girls and women who are married or in unions, cannot make their own decisions. This is a staggering figure today. Even more staggering are the 60% of maternal deaths that happen in countries affected by a humanitarian crisis. Adolescents suffering from poverty in the lowest wealth quintile are nearly 4 times more likely to give birth before the age of 18. This is one of the key issues that we work on at CIFF, and it's a great tragedy that so many adolescents have babies before they've chosen to do so. The Action Coalition for Bodily Autonomy and SRHR is going to provide us a critical platform for challenging all of these challenges. If you can challenge a challenge, we're going to tackle them. That's what we're going to do. And we're going to make the delivery of SDG 5 a reality by 2030. So I'm now going to move us on to the next stage of the session, which is a panel discussion with the co-leads of the Action Coalition, as well as some experts, advocates and implementers from across the world. So I have to remind you again to keep your video off when you're not speaking, so that it helps them do the layout for everyone who's watching. And without further ado, I'm really delighted to introduce our first speaker. Natalia is the Executive Director of UNFPA and is representing multilateral organizations as part of this Action Coalition, but she's also a cherished colleague, and I hope to see you in person soon, Natalia. It's a real pleasure to see you on screen. An experienced veteran in the international development sector and a doctor, dedicated advocate for women's sexual reproductive health and rights. Natalia So I'm really interested in hearing from you. What are the principles that the Action Coalition has identified for realizing the vision that we set out at the beginning? Over to you.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Kate and Tamil and everyone. It's such an honor to be here. And I just want to thank the governments of Mexico and France and UN Women for leadership in bringing us together and convening the Generation Equality Forum. The principles and the reason that UNFPA is so proud to co-lead this action coalition on bodily autonomy and sexual and reproductive health and rights is because of a vision. And that vision is for our progressive cooperative partnership to move forward in advancing gender equality, in advancing sexual and reproductive health and rights, the fundamental rights of every woman and every girl around the globe. I've been quoting Oscar Wilde, who once said, everything in the world is about sex, except sex. Sex is about power. And this is why our Action Coalition addresses power, whether a woman or girl has the power to make her own decisions about her body, her sexual health, and her rights. This will have a profound impact on her life. And to speak to the heart of the matter, our coalition addresses the power to say yes, but also the right to say no. We're addressing who is the owner of a girl's body. Is a woman's body her own? Is her right to say yes or say no at all in question? So yes, these principles are bringing a vision of a world where women and girls have power, they're able to exercise their sexual and reproductive health and rights, they're able to make informed decisions. Yes, free from coercion, free from violence or discrimination of any kind. And we are urgently translating that vision into action, an action coalition that will soon transform the planet Earth. Why not? So we dispense with the unacceptable status quo once and for all. It is unacceptable that every day 33,000 girls are married off underage against their will. It's unacceptable. 1 in 3 traumatized by violence in her lifetime, and unacceptable by our studies that it's only about 57% of women who decide, who can make their own decisions regarding sex, regarding contraception, regarding healthcare. And for far too many women and adolescent girls, bodily autonomy and reproductive rights, which is fundamental to gender equality, is nothing but an elusive dream. So as we co-lead, we've agreed upon cross-cutting action and looking at all areas that can help flip that script. And the principles that we're committed to are first, rights-based approaches, reaffirming the right to health. That means universal availability, acceptability, and accessibility of sexual and reproductive health services and a high standard of quality care. The second principle, we're focused on understanding and addressing the intersections between gender and other forms of discrimination, especially since these simultaneous inequalities frequently lead to a woman or girl's right being violated. Third, intercultural approaches. We have to acknowledge the differences among each of us, ethnic, racial, socioeconomic, whatever it may be, while ensuring that women and girls are never denied their inherent rights in the name of culture or in the name of tradition. Fourth of the 5, we are guided by an integrated definition of sexual and reproductive health and rights that recognizes that SRHR relies on the broader realization of physical, mental, emotional, and social well-being. And last, leaving no one behind means serving people who are furthest behind first. And I would put into this list: marginalized adolescent girls, anyone who's facing inequity and disparity, and everything that the COVID pandemic has exacerbated, as we've seen factors of race, being indigenous, age, elderly, as well as young, et cetera, et cetera. So with this blueprint for action, Kate, I really hope that we're not tinkering around the edges and we're going after the ambition that we need to accelerate the gender equality commitments. They were made in Cairo, they were made in Beijing. It's been more than a quarter of a century. And this is a moment when I think we can galvanize world attention. Yes, there's a lot to be done. Yes, there's a long way to go, but I'm heartened to see the governments and the advocates who are rallying behind sexual and reproductive health and rights. Never mind the political pushback. Women want to move forward. The march forward continues. So you see, I'm confident that we can deliver, and we have to deliver. This is what the world needs right now. Thank you.
Hi, Natalia, thank you so much. And if my video wasn't off, you would have seen me vigorously nodding all the way through that. Such an inspiration to hear you. And I couldn't agree more that now is absolutely the time to take that holistic view. It's absolutely crucial. And by taking this holistic view, we could power a gendered recovery, and closing that gender gap would really boost communities and societies. We talk a lot about green recovery in the environmental movement. We also need a gendered recovery. Think about how we could power everyone forward with that. Thank you so much, Natalia. And I'm really excited now to introduce Minister Elisabeth Moreno, who I've had the pleasure of meeting only online as well in these odd times. But Elisabeth is the Minister Delegate for Gender Equality, Diversity and Equal Opportunities in the Office of the Prime Minister, and from France, of course. So, Minister Moreno, I'd like to talk about what success looks like with you. Can you please share with us what are the concrete goals that have been agreed upon by the Action Coalition leaders? Over to you.
Indeed, and I'm really looking forward to meeting with you face to face soon, believe me. Mesdames et messieurs les ministres, directrices d'agences onusiennes, d'organisations internationales, fondations de la société civile, membres d'organisations et de mouvements de jeunes et féministes, chers partenaires, chères toutes et tous. Avant toute chose, je voudrais vous faire part de la joie qui m'anime aujourd'hui de participer au lancement du Forum Génération Égalité à Mexico avec vous toutes et tous pour ce moment si important pour faire progresser les droits des femmes et des filles. Vous m'avez demandé ce que la coalition s'est fixé pour objectif pour les prochaines années et ce qu'elle compte obtenir. Et avant de vous répondre, je voudrais présenter mes remerciements au Mexique et à ONU Femmes pour la tenue de ce forum et pour la préparation du plan d'accélération mondial pour l'égalité entre les femmes et les hommes et ces 6 coalitions d'action. Ces derniers mois ont permis d'aboutir à des plans d'action ambitieux et vecteurs de changement pour les 5 prochaines années. Et mes remerciements vont aussi aux 16 champions de la coalition d'action sur la liberté de disposer de son corps et les droits et santé sexuelle et reproductive. Je sais qu'ils n'ont pas ménagé leurs efforts depuis le lancement des coalitions, il y a déjà plus d'1 an, déjouant les difficultés entraînées par la pandémie de la Covid-19, ayant rendu leur rencontre impossible. C'est un travail inédit qui a été réalisé. 16 acteurs de tous horizons ont travaillé ensemble, échangé leur expertise, leur savoir-faire et leurs connaissances et ont déployé un travail de coopération formidable pour proposer un programme d'action très ambitieux. Ce programme d'action repose sur 3 thématiques d'intervention jugées comme prioritaires pour faire progresser substantiellement et durablement les droits et santé sexuelle et reproductive des femmes et des filles et permettre de leur donner une réelle liberté de disposer comme elles l'entendent de leur corps et de leur sexualité. Je suis donc très honorée de vous présenter ce plan d'action et les objectifs que la coalition entend se donner pour les 5 prochaines années. La première action sera de développer l'éducation complète à la sexualité. La coalition se donne ainsi pour objectif de faire en sorte que 50 millions d'enfants, d'adolescents et de jeunes supplémentaires d'ici 2026 aient accès à l'éducation complète à la sexualité à l'école, mais aussi en dehors de l'école. La deuxième action vise l'amélioration de la disponibilité, de l'accessibilité, de l'acceptabilité et de la qualité des services complets de contraception et d'avortement. Il s'agira ainsi, dans le cadre des soins complets en matière de droits et santé sexuelle et reproductif, d'améliorer la qualité et l'accès aux services de contraception pour 50 millions d'adolescentes et de femmes supplémentaires dans le monde. Il s'agira également de soutenir la suppression des politiques restrictives et des obstacles juridiques pour que d'ici 2026, 50 millions d'adolescentes et de femmes supplémentaires aient accès à un avortement sûr et légal. Enfin, le troisième volet d'action se concentrera sur les moyens pour parvenir réellement à la liberté de disposer de son corps et la capacité de décision des femmes et des filles. La coalition travaillera sur les changements de normes en matière de genre et pour améliorer l'information destinée aux femmes et aux filles sur leurs droits, avec l'objectif que d'ici 2026, 260 millions de filles, d'adolescents et de femmes supplémentaires dans toute leur diversité soient en mesure de prendre des décisions autonomes concernant leur corps, leur sexualité et leur reproduction. Enfin, des changements juridiques et politiques seront recherchés pour protéger et promouvoir l'autonomie corporelle et les DSSR dans au moins 20 pays d'ici 2026. Voici donc les 3 objectifs ambitieux de la coalition, mais ces objectifs ne pourront être atteints sans l'implication de tous les acteurs et en particulier les organisations de la société civile qui jouent un rôle essentiel. C'est pourquoi une 4e action de cette coalition visera à renforcer les organisations et les réseaux de filles, de femmes et de féministes pour promouvoir et protéger l'autonomie corporelle et la santé et les droits sexuels et reproductifs. Il nous faut accroître la participation et le soutien aux organisations féministes, y compris les organisations dirigées par des filles, ainsi que l'appui aux femmes défenseurs des droits humains et renforcer les organisations, les réseaux et les mouvements qui œuvrent à la promotion et à la protection de l'autonomie corporelle et des droits sexuels et reproductifs. Nous avons besoin de ces acteurs au plus près des réalités locales pour nous assurer que les droits des femmes et des filles si durement acquis ces dernières années ne soient jamais remis en cause et qu'ils continuent de progresser. Voilà donc la feuille de route ambitieuse dont les champions se sont dotés pour les 5 années à venir. Les prochains mois vont être décisifs. Il nous faut mobiliser le plus grand nombre d'acteurs et traduire nos efforts en initiatives concrètes. Pour conclure, mesdames et messieurs, je voudrais vous faire part de notre plus grande détermination et tout notre enthousiasme pour les prochains mois. Et nous espérons évidemment que vous vous joindrez à nous nombreux dans ce grand mouvement. Et je vous donne rendez-vous du 30 juin au 2 juillet prochain à Paris pour le concrétiser. Je vous remercie.
Merci, Madame la Ministre. I'm so pleased to see the actions presented today. And I just want to reinforce that this is not a menu for pick and choose. This is an integrated action plan of mutually reinforcing efforts. And in this action coalition, as we all know, the opposition is fierce. But we need to be more fierce and more united and hold this package of actions together. And I think Madame la Ministre will help us in doing that. So thank you ever so much. I'm now going to move on to discuss the next slide. We're going to hear from Dr. Alvaro Bermejo, who's the Executive Director of IPPF. Alvaro has been working in the field of sexual health for the last 2 decades, including briefly at CIFF as my colleague as well, which was a great joy. And I've had the immense pleasure of welcoming him again to the stage. So you're going to introduce us to the first action, which is increasing access to comprehensive sexuality education for children, adolescents and youth, both in and out of school. Thanks, Alvaro. Lovely to see you. Over to you.
Thank you, Kate. Huge thanks from my side to you and all the organizers of this. And as you say, fierce we need to be and fierce we shall be. Comprehensive sexuality education is a transformational tool that will help young people develop agency. And through that, it will bring real change. It will help achieve gender equality and build stronger and well-informed generations. We all know it works. Even those who believe it best to keep young people in the dark, even those who want the status quo preserved through ignorance and control, know it works. That's why they oppose it so fiercely. Comprehensive sexuality education, or CSE, goes beyond biological and health information to include values creation around human rights, bodily autonomy, and gender equality. It's thus very clear that if we want to fulfill women's and girls' rights to bodily autonomy and sexual and reproductive health and rights, we need to expand and secure access to comprehensive sexuality and education in and out of school for more children, adolescents, and youth. More concretely, for 50 million young children by 2026, as defined in the Action Coalition draft. So how are we going to do this? How do we focus on delivery? Well, first, we need to make comprehensive sexuality education truly youth-centered, with young people playing an active role in the design, implementation, and evaluation of CSE. And we need to make CSE part of national education curricula and ensure that adolescents have access to education independent of marital status, pregnancy, or childbearing status. Number 2, we must create an environment that supports CSE. We will do that by organizing a large-scale, multi-country social media and political advocacy campaign, or by developing and implementing parent schools with a CSE curriculum. Number 3, we must strengthen human and financial resources for in-school CSE and strengthen out-of-school delivery platforms. We must ensure that they understand youth as a heterogeneous group with a diversity of sexual orientations and gender identities intersected with ethnicity, race, disabilities, and others. And number 4, we need to link comprehensive sexuality education with SRHR service delivery that is accessible, friendly, and acceptable to children, adolescents, and youth. Without this, CSE curriculums will not fulfill their potential. From our side, and based on the commitments we made in Nairobi, IPPF and Rutgers, our member association in the Netherlands, have established 3 centers of excellence on comprehensive sexuality education, one in Togo, one in Ghana, and one in Colombia. And in addition, we're ensuring the delivery of high quality integrated gender and rights-based CSE through an integrated international e-learning platform that allows other organizations to access the latest practices in the implementation and scale up of SRHR. We know there's a long road ahead. So I'd like to end by congratulating UN Women, the government of Mexico and France, all CSOs, the foundations led by CIFF, and in particular, youth-led women and feminist organizations, governments, and the private sector for their tireless work on all these action coalitions. We remain committed to working with all of you to reach 50 million children, adolescents, and youth in the next 5 years. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you so much, Alvaro. And this couldn't be a more important topic. Engaging boys and girls at a young age on the topic of SRHR and bodily autonomy is absolutely key. We've got evidence at CIFF of the impact that CSE can have on girls in school, but also lots of promising evidence out of school as well. And I have the huge privilege not just to introduce our next speaker, but also via CIFF to fund some of their work. I'm really excited to hand over to Manak Matiyani, who's a feminist queer activist and the executive director of the YP Foundation, which, if you don't know, it is a wonderful organization that facilitates youth leadership on the issues of gender justice, sexuality rights, health equity and inclusive education. Manak is going to tell us about how to deliver these kinds of interventions on the ground due to extensive experience doing this practically. So can you tell us how you deliver this in your day-to-day work? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me, to fellow panelists, government representatives, Kate, comrades from development and activism, and most of all to the young people who are and should be leading this work from the front. I'm grateful to be standing on the shoulder of giants in this work and on this panel. As Kate mentioned, I represent the YP Foundation, a youth organization that develops young people's feminist and rights-based leadership. We implement comprehensive sexuality education both in and out of schools and advocate for the incorporation of CSE within education and health programming. As we come together now to demand commitments for action, let us acknowledge that the evidence to get behind CSE as an approach already exists, as has been said on this panel, and that the reasons to ignore it are political and not just programmatic. The YP Foundation was started in 2002 by a group of young people to address the absence of political perspectives in otherwise sanitized and charitable youth work. The remarkable strategies that the Action Coalition has put forth must be understood in this context and are central to how we actually implement this on ground. These strategies enshrine comprehensive sexuality education as a right for adolescents and young people, and rights are political, especially when the demand is for institutions to give up power to young people to lead systemic change on issues that are contentious and taboo. Here, I would like to share the top 5 lessons that we have learned about power politics in CSE that are central to how we actually deliver this work, deliver these programs on ground. We have done so in the last 18 years and continue to do so with support from many organizations, including CIFF. 1, we should aim to achieve agency, freedom, sexual self-determination, and youth leadership, but end up settling for delaying marriage, protection from violence and disease, access to services, and peer education. Programmatic outcomes and the focus on deliverables is political, and so not losing sight of the vision for rights under pressure of achieving outputs is number 1. 2, listening to young people is hard. Despite the global discourse on meaningful youth participation, avoiding tokenism takes consistent work in each policy and programming process. Learning from young people to change our content, approach, and ideas involves giving up power. Continuously pushing people and institutions to do this, and making sure that youth participation and leadership is seen as something that is about power, and power is political. 3, young people are a demographic dividend and a large percentage of the population. They are also trans, queer, Dalit, people of color, people with disabilities, asylum seekers, violence survivors, abortion seekers, and also right-wing trolls. Let us not romanticize or dehumanize young people into a homogeneous category in our approach, our content, or our mobilization on ground, because the call to leave no one behind is also political. 4, the devil is in the details. It is easy to hide behind broad commitments on adolescent health and well-being, knowing that SRHR is actually the first tenuous topic that gets knocked off the list in operation. So continuously pushing for specific budget allocations to tackle these taboos. This is the bedrock of a systemic approach to advance CSE in law, policies, and institutions, because money is always political. 5, if you expect the adolescent girl to stick her neck out to break the stigma in her family, you have to be willing to accompany her all the way. This requires taking conversations out of the classroom to parents, service providers, policymakers, lawmakers, community members, both online and on ground. It requires sticking our necks out in contexts where the popular vote, the popular voter, and the elected politician might all be against us. And politics is, of course, political. Risk reduction, disease or pregnancy prevention, and delaying marriage are all very important goals that take concerted long-term effort. However, let us not lose sight of our vision for equity, justice, and rights, because this gives young people the power to lead the way to achieve those goals. That is central to how we implement these programs on ground. And I want to acknowledge the work of amazing trailblazers who champion this vision for young people everywhere, from boardrooms of philanthropies to international diplomacy platforms to policymaking tables and with young people on ground. Many of you are on this panel today, and I'm grateful for your vision and your work. I resonate with your call for actions that enshrine access to stigma-free and technically correct comprehensive sexuality education as a right of all young people across the world. And it is in talking about CSE as a right and as a political issue that this goal, this vision for young people will be realized. That is how we implement our programs on ground.
Thank you so much. And what an inspiring and useful intervention. And I particularly liked your emphasis on your reminder that it's not just about health outcomes, it's also about rights. That's a good reminder for people like me who work in philanthropy, but also, as you said, for politicians and policymakers. And it's great to see youth leading from the front. And I think you have many allies on this conversation. So thank you ever so much, Manak. We're going to now move to another poll, and it's a bit mean to make you vote between these different tactics and say which is your favorite. So let me frame it slightly differently. I'm going to say, pick the one where you think the most effort is going to be helpful in the next 5 years to really reach those 50 million extra young people. So where do we need to turbocharge our efforts? So if we could bring up the poll options right now, we've got improving the quality of CSE in and out of school. We've got laws and policies to make CSE mandatory. We've got norm change to support CSE. And you will have heard Manak talk about the engagement with the community and parents and others around young people. And then the fourth option is linking CSE with services that are accessible and acceptable to young people. And that's important, accessible and acceptable to young people, asking young people what they want and need. Great, so those are the four, and I'm going to let you vote now, and hopefully the results will come up in a second. Thank you. So it's a close run thing because these are all so important, but the winner is, with over a third of the votes, is linking CSE with services that are accessible and acceptable to young people. So once young people are educated, giving them the opportunity to fulfill their rights and access the services they deserve. Norm change was a close follower of that #1 choice. So thank you very much. I'm going to move on now to our fifth speaker. The next slide, I think, needs to come up at this stage. We're going to discuss the second action from the draft blueprint with this speaker, which is about the quality of an access to abortion and contraceptive services, and support the removal of restrictive policies and legal barriers that prevent access to these services. So I'm very excited to invite Edurne Cadernas, Director General of Public Affairs, Minister of Women, Gender and Diversity from Argentina. So Ms. Cadernas, before we move on to the second action, I really wanted to congratulate you for the important progress that we've recently seen in Argentina. And I couldn't watch enough the crowds, the vision of those crowds supporting the change. So congratulations, it was a real boost to our movement. So we're delighted to have you here to speak more about the second action and the key tactics that we've agreed as a leadership group, and find out how to progress them over the next year, speaking, I'm sure, from some personal experience. Thank you very much. Over to you. Edurne is not with us.
Sí, estoy acá.
Ah, hola, perdón, gracias.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias. En primer lugar, quiero felicitar al Gobierno de México por poder que estemos acá, que podamos estar acá todos juntos, juntes. En primer lugar, quiero dejarles el saludo cordial y afectuoso de la ministra Elisabeth Gómez Alcorta. Para nosotras desde nuestro ministerio es una gran alegría que podamos estar acá en este foro. Nos hubiera gustado tener estos intercambios de manera presencial, pero confiamos en que este espacio puede ser y será útil y valioso para fortalecer nuestros compromisos. Durante meses trabajamos en nuestra coalición para acordar acciones. En materia de acceso al aborto legal, seguro y gratuito, así como en materia de servicios de salud sexual y reproductiva que incluyan servicios de anticoncepción, nosotros en nuestra coalición consideramos prioritario hacer foco en 3 cuestiones claves: prestación de servicios, leyes y políticas, y financiamiento. En materia de prestación de servicios, creemos que es clave mejorar el acceso a planes de atención primaria de salud de calidad que provean servicios integrales de salud sexual y reproductiva y que promuevan el acceso de todas las personas a los métodos de anticoncepción de su elección y a las opciones de servicios integrales de aborto y posaborto, con insumos que sean suministrados por las comunidades, incluyendo la facilitación del acceso a los servicios de autoadministración y la remoción de todas las barreras financieras, jurídicas y socioculturales. En materia de prestación de servicios también, accesibilidad y aceptabilidad, entre otras cosas, mediante las garantías de una atención intercultural, que son, porque esto es un componente indiscutible de la calidad. Y dar seguimiento y analizar la prestación de los servicios y los datos sobre los resultados, en materia de salud sexual y reproductiva, de derechos sexuales y reproductivos, que estén desagregados por sexo, por edad, por grupo étnico, por lugar de residencia, etc. En materia de leyes y políticas se traducen en la adopción e implementación de normas para garantizar los derechos, en particular el derecho al aborto, a la anticoncepción y a todo lo que incluye dentro de ese concepto que son los derechos reproductivos. Por supuesto, en consonancia con las orientaciones en los mejores estándares en la materia. Leyes y políticas que permitan el acceso a la anticoncepción y al aborto autoadministrado. Leyes y políticas que eliminen las barreras regulatorias y normativas que impiden el acceso a los derechos. Y en materia de financiamiento, aumentar y mejorar los recursos domésticos y el financiamiento externo para garantizar el acceso, así como invertir en análisis de mercado, de seguridad y de diversificación de insumos y compra estratégica. Cuando hablamos de las acciones para llegar a nuestros compromisos, hablamos de marcos legales y de implementación. De eso se trata, de voluntades y compromisos desplegados en todos los espacios posibles. Quiero hacer referencia a quienes me antecedieron en la palabra y retomar un poco lo que decía Natalia. Tenemos unas definiciones claras y nos gusta hablar en materia de derechos. Y en este sentido, siguiendo las palabras de Kate, me enorgullece decir que el Estado argentino asumió la responsabilidad de legislar y proteger con políticas públicas la salud y la vida de las mujeres y de las personas con otras identidades de género, con capacidad de gestar, con la sanción de la Ley 27.610 el 30 de diciembre de 2020. Con esta ley, que fue moldeada a través de los años, nuestro país se hizo cargo del marco del derecho internacional de los derechos humanos y de los compromisos que el Estado argentino ha asumido, a garantizar los derechos a la vida, a la salud integral, a una vida libre de violencias, entre otros. Y con esto también pone esfuerzos muy concretos para lograr uno de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, el objetivo 5, del que muchos países estamos atrás, para lograr la igualdad entre los géneros. La sanción de esta ley ¿no? Nos pone frente a una verdad que sabemos, que es que la amenaza de la sanción penal fracasó, ¿no? Frente al aborto. Porque la decisión de no transitar una gestación forzada ni una maternidad forzada es irrenunciable para muchas personas, para muchas mujeres, a una costa de su vida y de su libertad. En este sentido, quiero resaltar que Argentina ha empezado a desandar el camino de la desigualdad para recorrer el de la justicia social en el marco del ejercicio de derechos, para que todas las personas gestantes, para que todas las personas tengan los mismos cuidados y condiciones, cualquiera sea el lugar del país que habiten, su nivel socioeconómico y el subsistema de salud público o privado donde se atiendan. Hemos llegado a esta gran conquista, que todas ustedes vieron en las calles, tras una larga historia de lucha, y por la decisión de un gobierno de seguir ampliando derechos. Es un logro enorme que la agenda política tome las demandas populares, feministas, que estuvieron y siguen estando en las calles, en las organizaciones, en todos los espacios. Es por eso que queremos en este foro compartir esta experiencia, porque esperamos que esta conquista apunte a difundir y promover el progresivo reconocimiento a nivel internacional, a nivel regional, a nivel doméstico de los derechos sexuales y reproductivos, su reconocimiento y todas las medidas necesarias para su efectivo goce en el marco del derecho internacional de los derechos humanos y sus estándares. Como decía Natalia, a más de 25 años de Beijing, estamos en este foro para invitarnos y a animarnos a más y mejores compromisos para avanzar en una agenda de igualdad sustantiva. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much, Edurne. And I'm imagining many of our participants at home waving their green colours and banners as you were speaking. Thank you so much. And I'm really excited to introduce our next speaker, who is a public policy specialist and leads the policy advocacy and capacity strengthening work at Y-ACT, Vanya Kibui. We have the great pleasure of working with her at CIFF through the Self-Care Trailblazers group, which is an advocacy group that's helping countries and champions work on self-managed care, which is a way of removing access barriers for women and girls to empower them to take control of their reproductive health. And it's been so important to advance self-care, particularly in the pandemic when access was so restricted and health systems were so overburdened. So I'm really excited to hear what Vanya has to say about bringing advocacy for reproductive health, especially on safe abortion for so many years, what you've learned and how we can advance women's autonomy. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And it's great to see you again. Last I saw you was at the ICPD Youth for UHC event. It's great to see you again. So thank you to the Self-Care Trailblazer Group, CIFF and UN Women for this great opportunity to contribute to this conversation on bodily autonomy. As you heard, my name is Vanya Kibui. I lead the policy advocacy, capacity strengthening, and youth grassroots coalition building work at Y-ACT with support to youth organizations to identify SRHR interventions and build effective strategies and build coalitions to implement them. I'm also a member of the Self-Care Trailblazers group, as Kate had shared. So I do what I do because I have a deep passion for gender justice. So initially, as you know, I started human rights work. I thought it was all about everybody getting receiving what they deserve. But later on, you begin to understand that full equality and equity for all genders in all spheres of life is a different conversation, because those who make decisions often do so through the lenses of their own biases. And it's therefore very critical for all of us, especially communities that find themselves in conditions of marginalization, especially women, girls, persons living with disability, to get involved in decision-making so that the resulting legal frameworks and governance structures reflect our realities. And this is something I really observed and I've observed as I've advocated for improved legal and policy frameworks to enable women and girls to access safe legal abortion. What I saw was that while we are legislating on a health issue like abortion, which, you know, cannot be gainsaid that it's going to be the only health condition that you're going to find in a constitution, we have regulated a maternal health issue using laws. And in doing this, what we often do, or what we often have done, is try to respond to everybody else's needs or desires, except that of the woman or the girl who needs the service. So we have either intentionally or inadvertently created all this legal, medical, and administrative barriers that have perpetually marginalized and stigmatized women who need safe legal abortion. It's for this reason that self-managed abortion is such a revolutionary part of self-care. Although it's likely that self-managed abortion could have occurred across history, it's a core part of the self-care conversation and universal health coverage because it's essentially about restorative justice. It restores privacy, confidentiality, and bodily autonomy to women and girls, because at this point, they're really able to make decisions about their own bodies and their own needs. It has also been one of the key ways to reduce abortion-related morbidity and mortality. Key lessons I've learned through this work that I'd like to share with you as you make a commitment to this action are coincidentally linked to the emerging trends we've always witnessed since the COVID-19 pandemic came into the scene. To be honest, the gaps that we have all seen, or the weaknesses in our healthcare systems, were the woman's and the girl's story. So the COVID-19 story, in terms of what we need to do to strengthen our gains, has been especially the marginalized woman and girl's story. So one of the biggest lessons is that we need to organize ourselves, we need to solidify and protect our gains, and we need to understand opposition to our gains, which means funding it and responding to it. But more practical lessons that I think that we can go away with are a few. The first one is that we need to rethink the way we approach regulation in healthcare. And this was mentioned earlier in terms of the rights-based approach, that the focus should be on the people who need the service when formulating regulations. As I'd said, because laws are man-made, they're always going to leave someone out. And so if we focus on those who need, we're able to, as seen in self-managed abortion, utilize self-care in this instance as a potential and powerful tool to restore the power of care in the hands of girls and women. The other lesson is addressing limited access to care. As you saw with the COVID-19 pandemic, there were curfews, lockdown, facilities closed, and stockouts. So imagine these restrictions from a reproductive health perspective, because that's what so many women and girls go through. They do not have the access to modern contraceptive, whether there was a curfew or not, and the curfew just made it worse. They're locked down with their abusers. Facilities closing meant that even there's self-stigma as well as stockouts. The other lesson that I can share is the need to increase the limited domestic financing for reproductive health. One of the biggest problems with a lot of developing economies is that there's a great gap in domestic financing for reproductive health and a large reliance on donor funding. And when it came to the COVID-19 pandemic, reproductive health needs were deprioritized. And so you're seeing, like in Kenya, a 30% increase in unintended pregnancy, spikes in teen pregnancies, as well as other harmful practices. The other lesson was the need to remove unnecessarily burdensome regulatory hurdles, as we've talked about earlier. And increasing and training limited human resources for the few providers who are there, train them, and increase the human resources. The reason these are the key lessons for me is because self-care is an essential part of sexual reproductive health. COVID-19 could just be that opportunity for us to begin investing in resources for self-care interventions that create a robust infrastructure, supporting the procurement of commodities, reducing the cost of those commodities, and investing in public knowledge, information, and self-care options. most of us saw many of our governments come up with two-tier approaches to address COVID-19 in itself, hospital managed and home managed. And this is essentially what we would be asking for in terms of developing frameworks for self-care. So finally, for you who would be considering to make a commitment to this and wondering what to do, is to advocate. We encourage you to advocate for self-care as an option to increasing access to contraception and safe abortion care in your country context. There's a lot we can do to help improve this in our countries. Having that, we already have a global consensus on safe, effective self-care. The second one is that we're inviting you to join the Self-Care Trailblazers group. Come join us and learn about, support, and champion self-care approaches that we can build more equitable, sustainable, and healthy futures. Finally, as the self-care movement grows, the Trailblazers group continues to build a momentum. We remain very thrilled to offer experiences and learn from our partners working across Africa, Latin America, and Asia, and the rest of the world, where we can build a more equitable world for women and girls. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanya. Another person I would like to see in person and have a long conversation with. Thank you for sharing your reflections. Because we're running a little bit behind time, I'm going to move straight on to the poll at this point. This poll is going to, like the previous ones, give you an opportunity to opine on the different tactics that are needed to improve accessibility and the quality of contraceptive and safe abortion services. So what's going to be the most important tactic, do you think, for making progress in the next 5 years? So here are the options. Self-care solutions is number one, my personal favorite, but I'm not trying to skew the vote. Increasing financing for contraception and abortion services. The third one is about improving commodity security and choices. And the fourth is about, again, policy and legal barriers to safe and legal abortion that we've heard about already. So thank you so much. The voting is underway. I'm looking forward to hearing the results on that one. Interesting. So removing policy and legal barriers to safe and legal abortion, and that had almost half of the vote. That's a big winner. So thank you very much, everyone, for your participation and continued attention as we move on. So we're now going to take a little break before moving to our third blueprint action. But I want to thank our panelists so far. So Natalia, Elisabeth, Alvaro, Manak, Edurne, and Vanya. Thank you very much. You can clap. No one can hear you, but I'm sure you are. It's been fascinating to hear from you all about the Action Coalition. I'm feeling really quite energized now. And also so many of you, through your lived experience and the work that you've been doing, have brought some real depth to the conversation. So thank you so much. If you've got questions for these panelists, the Q&A box is available and we'll have time for a couple of questions at the end. But I'm now going to hand over to Annalijn Conklin, who's going to lead us in an 8-minute movement break. The 8 is very specific to catch up with my loss of time. So we're going to try and get our heart rates up and get going. So Annalijn, over to you.
Great, thank you. So I just would like to acknowledge that I am currently speaking to you today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam Nation. So I'm going to share with you some Indigenous Filipino martial arts to get us moving. If you can all stand up and find a little space. All you need is enough space to have your arms open, and we're going to get started. So just start in the center point, and we're gonna go off on angles. So just step with your right foot and come on an angle, and then come to the middle and come to the left side. So we're gonna just do that for a couple of times. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So now from the middle, we're going to step back on an angle, come to the middle and step back. So we're just going to do 10 of those. 1, 2, you can keep your hands just by your side or up in front, however you want. We'll get those engaged shortly. Okay, a couple of more. And back to the center. So what I'd like you to do is, if you can get yourself a pen or anything that you have for your hand. If you don't have a pen, just use your index finger. What we're going to do is we're going to do the same footwork, but now I'm going to make an X with my hand, and I'm going to keep it in the right hand and left side. So right foot, X, left side, X, right side, X, left side, X, step and 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 X, and one more time. And now we're going to step back. So we're going to step back and X, and step back and X, and step back and X, and back and X. And the reason why I'm getting you to do this is in part to get you moving, obviously, but the crossing of the body from left side to right side engages your brain in a really good way. So we're going to switch hands. So anyone who's a lefty, you're going to like this. We'll start on the right with our foot. So we're going to start right and make an X on the left. And we're going to do it again. Forward, X, forward, X, forward, X, forward, X. So this is really good for cross-lateral movement. And this has been shown with neuroscience that it can activate your brain and your pathways to create new pathways in your brain. And it kind of feels like a bit of a brain scramble, okay, which is okay, and that's good. Let's go back, 1, and back 2, and back 1, and 2, back 1, and back 2, and one more, back 1, and back 2. And now I'm going to add a little bit more complications. So we're going to keep this sort of diamond triangle open position, but instead of just stepping forward, I'm going to bring my leg up, go across, and then up again and back to the middle. So if you can't, if your balance is a little off, just lift your leg a little bit. It doesn't have to be all the way up. If you want a little bit of extra kind of movement, raise your leg all the way up and challenge yourself with the stability that happens, squeezing your glutes and across and back and across and back. And now with your finger, with your right hand, or if you've got a pen, just start making that X and still keep your footwork going. So you might have your X happening as you go across and then as you come down the middle, or just keep it going, whatever makes sense. Maybe just do it once in the middle. If you're getting confused, that's okay. This is good. The brain scramble is good. So switch your hand and we're going to switch direction. So we're going to kind of just do the triangle in the other way. And again, if your stability is such that you can't raise your leg, just kind of bring it forward to the side and back, you know? So you don't have to lift the leg up. If this is sort of if that's enough for you, that's okay. If you want a little bit of that extra workout part, you can raise the leg. Okay, and then let's go a kind of a rear triangle. So now we went backwards to the middle, to the side, and then now we're going to go across. So back and up and across, back and up and across. We'll just do this with both sides, and that's probably our 8 minutes. And I'll try and cool you down after that. Okay, so now bring your hand involved in this and do your X. So you're just trying to go from your shoulder to your hip, and it's really good to cross that body. And so you're getting coordination, you're practicing your stability, and you're practicing doing kind of 2 different things at once, something with your feet and something with your hands. And in that process, you're also going across your body. Okay, so let's go the other way with the other hand. So up, across, and back, and up, and across, and up, and across, and up, and across. So let's go the other way where we go back and across and up. So we're doing a triangle in the other way. So kind of like an upside down triangle, back to the right hand and across, up and across. 2 more. And last one. And then switch your hands one more time, 5 of these. And 2. And 3. And 4. And last one, 5.
Thanks, Annalijn. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks very much.
Thank you. So thanks very much to Annalijn. I hope you're feeling energized. And we're now going to turn to the 3rd action in our blueprint. And I'll just remind all the panelists again, just to turn off your video when you're not speaking, if that's okay. And we're very lucky to have Charlotte Pram-Nielsen, who's a senior health specialist at GFF, and she's going to take us through the SRHR decision-making and bodily autonomy action. Thank you. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Kate, and thank you to all the organizations as well, and the organizers for giving Global Finance Facility this opportunity to speak. I'd like to say for this action, there's 2 things that will require all our collaboration and our efforts and our commitments. And to make sure that I have enough time, I'd like to focus on the tactics. And as I say, so it's about changing the norms, and it's about making sure that we support changes in removing legal and policy barriers to SRHR. So if I go back to changing norms, we need to ensure that women and girls are empowered to take the decisions over their own bodies and health. And by that, we mean that we need to target community level to address gender inequalities and harmful practices such as child marriage or FGMC. And the transformational changes that are needed can only come from within the communities. And therefore, we need to engage with the men and the boys, the religious and traditional leaders, who are often the influencers in the type of societies. And therefore, we would need to support countries to scale up these large social and behavior change communication campaigns that target these specific influencers, so we can promote women and girls' access and rights to SRHR services and their bodily autonomy. To give an example, with GFF, we often support countries to do these large SBCC campaigns and have enhanced dialogue with religious groups, for instance, in Nigeria, which have provided stronger support for girls' access to SRHR services. And second, as I said, it's also about combining this community level engagement with the changes in laws and policies, so we can remove these legal and policy barriers to SRHR. In many countries, the women and girls, they face a specific legal barriers to SRHR decision-making and bodily autonomy, such as the access to contraceptive services for adolescents, or the need for a spousal agreement to access essential healthcare, such as a cesarean section, for instance. GFF is a mechanism that is hosted at the World Bank, and with that we have the opportunity to tie the grant financing to a policy dialogue and legal reforms through substantial budget support. And for instance, we've been working closely with several countries, and we have an example in Niger where we're able to leverage these type of instruments to support legal changes for adolescent girls, where there was removal of the parental and husband mandatory accompaniment to get to access family planning services. And so through these actions in the Action 3, we as co-leaders support the commitment makers and the country leadership, and we aim to empower 260 million more girls and adolescents in all of their diversity, and to make autonomous decisions about SRHR. And we hope that at least 20 countries will engage in legal and policy changes and to protect and promote SRHR and bodily autonomy. And the low levels of external financing for SRHR is something that we've heard in many of the DFF partner countries. And so we are committed as a DFF to use our catalytic grant financing towards stronger commitments and financing for SRHR. And we in the Action Coalition are working with the partner countries, governments, CSOs, philanthropic organizations, and so we're really targeting these underfunded but high impact areas that SRHR and bodily autonomy are. So we must accelerate these efforts, move faster, and make sure that the next generation equality forum in Paris will be at this critical moment to galvanize this political will and financial commitment. So we, as a DFF, we are committed to use this country-led model that we have as a delivery platform to make sure that that we increase the SRHR decision-making and bodily autonomy for the women and adolescent girls that we serve. So thank you for your attention, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Charlotte. And as we're running a little bit behind time, I'm going to move straight on to our next speaker, Karla Choc, who is a Maya woman who studies environmental engineering and is the project coordinator and leader of NALEVAC, which is an organization led by and for young Indigenous women and girls in the highlands of Guatemala. Karla, thank you so much for being with us. I'd be really interested in hearing what you've learned through your work and success indeed in advancing girls and women's bodily autonomy and preventing child marriage and early unions. Thank you.
Buenos días, buenas tardes a la distinguida audiencia. Mi nombre es Karla Rach, soy mujer activista indígena Maya Archi. Desde el 2013 trabajamos con niñas indígenas Maya Archi en nuestras comunidades para transformar las dinámicas negativas de género por medio de la mentoría que les brindamos. En lo personal, me motiva a hacer este trabajo por las injusticias que existen en las comunidades indígenas de Guatemala que hemos demostrado que se pueden transformar. Les quiero compartir las 4 lecciones más importantes de nuestro trabajo. La primera lección es la inversiones en nuestra colectividad. Apostar a nuestra capacidad de liderazgo es el primer paso. Nuestra relación de alianza con el Population Council, por ejemplo, empezó con los programas de Abriendo Oportunidades que crean espacios seguros para niñas en comunidades indígenas de Guatemala. Y aunque hubo temporadas de financiamiento limitado, nos apoyaron a avanzar en diferentes maneras, año con año hasta la actualidad. El apoyo que requerimos va desde los estipendios para retribuir el trabajo de las mentoras, los talleres para formación, los materiales para las niñas y los costos de formalizar nuestra organización. Es común que a nosotras, las mujeres jóvenes que trabajamos directamente con las niñas, se nos exijan resultados ambiciosos, como eliminar el matrimonio infantil, con inversiones de 6 meses y con mecanismos exigentes de rendición de cuentas, sin tomar en cuenta que nosotras debemos superar obstáculos para procurar nuestra propia autonomía. Este reto es todavía más complejo en comunidades indígenas y para mujeres indígenas, quienes enfrentamos exclusión histórica. Por eso, Inversiones y compromisos de largo plazo contribuyen a garantizar nuestra autonomía como lideresas. La otra lección es entender que organizarnos lleva tiempo. El trabajo con el Population Council empezó en 2013. En 2014 ya estábamos pensando en formalizar nuestra organización, pero a la vez teníamos que tomar decisiones personales como empezar o terminar relaciones de pareja, apoyar a nuestros hermanos menores a continuar estudiando, asumir el activismo para luchar por mejores condiciones de vida para las niñas con quienes trabajamos o buscar recursos para continuar con nuestros estudios. La persistencia colectiva y el ejemplo de dinámicas ancestrales de organización comunitaria Maya Archi nos inspiró a seguir adelante y en 2017 formalizamos Nalipac. En 2019 iniciamos operaciones de nuestra casa productiva, una iniciativa de emprendimiento sostenible. Consiste con los principios 25 integrantes de Nalipac, somos dueñas de la casa productiva y nos encargamos 100% de su operación, demostrando que es posible un modelo de empoderamiento donde las mujeres lideramos con el ejemplo. Este es un ejemplo de inversiones significativas y transformadoras, pues las mujeres indígenas estamos al margen de la tenencia de la tierra y de la participación económica en las comunidades. Lección 3. Los modelos alternativos para las niñas, como las mentoras y las mentorías, les permiten ensayar su empoderamiento en espacios seguros, donde nadie las limita. En estos espacios, las niñas sueñan, aprenden sobre su cuerpo, sobre sus derechos sexuales y reproductivos, sobre la historia de resistencia y lucha de los pueblos indígenas y sobre conceptos clave para superar la pobreza como la soberanía alimentaria. Las madres apoyan nuestro trabajo, los líderes firman contratos comunitarios de compromiso para apoyarnos y las niñas nos piden que no dejemos de llegar. Esto demuestra que a pesar de las dificultades, las niñas no se han dado por vencidas y luchan por un mejor futuro, libre de violencia y con autonomía para tomar decisiones como completar sus estudios, el lugar donde quieren vivir y el momento oportuno para empezar una familia. Lección 4. Enseñar a las niñas sobre sus cuerpos, educación integral en sexualidad y derechos reproductivos toma tiempo. No bastan 6 meses ni 18 meses. Se requiere trabajo con generaciones completas, con niñas de 8 a 14 años y adolescentes de 15 a 19 años de manera simultánea. Y nosotras, como mujeres indígenas en condiciones de exclusión históricas, también requerimos tiempo y espacio para aprender sobre estos temas. Las guerras y los conflictos recientes nos han desconectado de figuras importantes como las comadronas, nuestras abuelas y nuestras madres, quienes tienen miedo de hablarnos de estos temas por toda la historia de desigualdad que han enfrentado. Además, los materiales que ya existen no responden a nuestras necesidades y se alejan de nuestra cosmovisión. Por ello, hemos aprendido que es importante desarrollar contenido desde nuestra cosmovisión y alineado a los derechos humanos universales. Ahora, estamos buscando la manera de incluir el empoderamiento económico en nuestro trabajo, pues la pobreza que enfrentamos es una barrera constante. Hacerle frente a este reto implica buscar modelos productivos que no se alejen de nuestra cultura y del legado de conocimiento ancestral de nuestros abuelos y abuelas. Estamos llegando a nuestras metas y queremos seguir luchando por un futuro mejor para las niñas. Luchamos por ellas y con ellas a través de fortalecer sus conocimientos. Seguiremos luchando por denunciar las injusticias y violaciones a sus derechos como las uniones tempranas y forzadas. Y hoy les pedimos a ustedes que se comprometan a luchar junto con nosotras. Gracias por la invitación y por el espacio.
Thanks so much, Karla, and congratulations on all your hard work, which seems to be yielding fantastic results. And at the heart of a women-centered approach is the right of every woman and girl to have control over their own bodies. And we know from the work that we fund at CIFF through Educate Girls in India or the Girls First Fund that operates globally, that harmful gender norms are always standing in the way. Where we see poverty and patriarchy intersect, as Safina Hussein says, that's where you'll find the most out-of-school girls or girls getting married young or getting pregnant young. So we need to tackle these gender norms, and Karla has shown us a really thoughtful way, a really practical way of achieving that in her community. So I'm going to go to a poll now. As with the others, you're going to have a choice regarding the tactics that you think are going to be the most useful. And Karla has just given you a masterclass, so I'm sure you're all going to pass this exam with flying colours. Over to the poll now. The questions are coming up. So community-based and group education, engaging stakeholders and allies, mass and social media campaigns, and legal and policy change, which has been a favorite so far. Okay, over to you. So the results are coming up now, and you've gone for nearly half of you, community-based and group education. It sounds like you were listening very intently to Karla's presentation. So thank you for participating in the poll. We're now going to go to our 9th speaker, and we're coming towards the end of our session in the next half an hour. So I'd like you to maintain your energy levels and attention, because you're not going to want to miss Agathe Blanc-Kamissoko, who's a program officer at Alliance Droits et Santé, and joins us from Côte d'Ivoire, presenting the 4th cross-cutting action to support feminist and women's rights organizations. Over to you. Agathe? Is Agathe on the line?
Oui, Kate.
Ah, bonsoir, bonjour. Merci.
Bonsoir, Kate. Merci beaucoup, merci pour l'invitation, merci pour cette opportunité qui nous est donnée de partager notre vision de la génération égalité. Depuis 25 ans après la conférence de Pékin, nous recherchons à présent des changements durables en faveur des femmes et de l'égalité des genres. Au premier rang de cette quête, nous avons évidemment les organisations de femmes, les organisations de jeunes filles, les organisations féministes, tous ces mouvements-là qui mènent la lutte, qui jour et nuit font en sorte que les discriminations à l'endroit des femmes soient bannies de notre quotidien. Ces organisations sont en première ligne. Elles sont proches des populations, elles connaissent mieux la réalité de ces populations-là, notamment les femmes. Elles connaissent leurs besoins, notamment en ce qui concerne l'accès aux soins et à la santé sexuelle et reproductive, de même qu'à la liberté de disposer de leur corps. Donc, nous pensons qu'accompagner ces mouvements, c'est accélérer le changement, et nous pensons que c'est l'un des objectifs clés du Forum Génération Égalité. C'est pourquoi au sein de la coalition d'action, nous avons identifié comme action concrète celle de renforcer les organisations de femmes, les organisations de filles, les organisations féministes, afin de promouvoir la liberté de disposer de son corps et également les droits et la santé sexuelle et reproductive.
Agathe, you've just gone on mute for some reason all of a sudden. I don't know if you can unmute, or maybe the organizers. I couldn't hear Agathe there. You're back, you're back.
Ouh là là. D'accord. Donc, je disais que pour renforcer ces organisations-là, ces organisations de femmes, de jeunes et de féministes, nous avons identifié 3 stratégies. La première est celle de la participation de ces femmes-là à la prise de décision. Il faut véritablement impliquer ces organisations de femmes dans la prise de décision en faveur de l'amélioration de leurs droits. Nous pensons qu'elles savent mieux que quiconque ce qui est bon pour elles. Il faut qu'elles soient impliquées en amont. Et deuxièmement, s'agissant de la redevabilité envers ces organisations dans l'exercice de ces décisions qui sont prises, il faut pouvoir retourner vers elles, leur donner la bonne information et leur donner les retombées de ces décisions qui ont été prises là. Cela permettra un meilleur suivi, une meilleure évaluation et une meilleure adaptation au contexte. Et pour finir, nous avons la question du financement. Je pense que l'intervenant tout à l'heure en parlait, la question du financement. Il faut pouvoir accroître les financements à l'endroit de ces mouvements de femmes-là et surtout alléger les modalités de financement parce que nous savons que ces organisations ne sont pas toujours bien structurées, ne sont pas toujours formellement constituées. Donc, il faut pouvoir alléger les financements qui leur sont accordés. Je conclus en disant que le renforcement est déterminant pour le changement que nous recherchons. Et une fois accomplis, ces mouvements auront tous les outils pour mener le plaidoyer, pour mener leurs actions, pour renforcer leurs interventions, pour que grâce à elles, la génération égalité soit véritablement une réalité. Je vous remercie.
Merci, Agathe. Thank you ever so much. And again, in the interest of time, I can't make any comments. I'd love to engage in conversation, but I'm going to move straight on to Françoise Moudouthe, who is, of course, the CEO of the African Women's Development Fund, a 20-year-old foundation that supports local and national and regional women's rights organization and does feminist movement building throughout Africa, sharing her wisdom and building capacity. So Françoise, thank you so much. Can you talk a little bit about the key lessons from the work you do? I'm sure everybody wants to hear, I think.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you for having us. I'm really just want to say thank you for including African voices and feminist voices in this forum. I'm particularly delighted and honored because the idea of the creation of the African Women's Development Fund came to our co-founders as they were preparing for the Beijing World Conference over 25 years ago. And they saw how little access African women's rights organizations had to funding, and how disempowered they were in relationship with funders. So this is why we do the work we do, even 20 plus more years later. And I think from that work, there are maybe 4 top lessons that we have learned, which I would really like to share for consideration for all of us here who are making commitments to advance the specific objectives of this action coalition. First, the lesson is we need to do more. It really is time to increase funding to feminist organizations and movements, especially in Africa and the Global South. The latest data from the OECD shows that feminist movements still receive less than 1% of all gender-focused official development assistance. Private foundations, from data from 2017, only have 0.42% of the grants dedicated to women's rights. So we can't make massive changes, which we know we need, with crumbs. So we need more funding. Secondly, we need for commitments to be done with the intention of doing better, not just more. I think the how of how we resource gender equality really matters. It's really important to provide longer term, more flexible and co-funding rather than project funding. And this is particularly critical in the wake of the COVID pandemic and of increased conservative backlash against women's rights, against feminist language, and also especially against women's bodily autonomy. The third lesson and message that I have is to really go straight to the movement. It's really critical to provide direct support to feminist organizations and movements across the global south, using diverse funding mechanisms, including working with women's funds, which are well established and well connected mechanisms, who really understand the movements because they work very closely with them. And last but not least, I want to say, please, let's be deliberate about listening. I think resourcing without listening is not just inefficient, it is harmful. So really urge you all to listen to learn from, to work with, and to support the full range of feminist organizers, including the most marginalized of women, including LGBTQI women, sex workers, indigenous defenders, disability rights defenders. The bottom line is that we are the experts on our own realities and of all our own sexualities. So we ask you and we urge you to commit to working with us, not just for us. Bottom line, funding feminist work needs to be feminist funding. Thank you very much.
Françoise, thank you, and thank you for the work you do, and great lessons there for me and many others in this space. And I know that Women's Funds and others are engaging in the Action Coalition on Feminist Leadership and Movements, and have been working on a new global alliance to help drive a coordinated effort on increasing the amount of funding, which, as Françoise says, is even less than 1%. I mean, we've really got to provide more resource to women's rights organizations and feminist movements, including young feminist movements, which for us at CIFF are particularly important. So we're now going to move to the Q&A, but I really want to thank Monique, Karla, Agathe, and Françoise for their intervention. Sorry, Charlotte, Monique, Charlotte spoke in Monique's place. So Charlotte, Karla, Agathe, and Françoise, thank you so much for your contributions. We're going to go to a couple of the questions now. I've got 2 questions, and I'm afraid we won't be able to have much of a discussion due to time. So I'm going to direct these 2 questions to 2 very specific panelists, if that's all right. Edurne, I'd like to ask one question to you. How do you think we can best protect and promote the bodily autonomy of the full diversity of people that we're talking about here, including LGBTQI and non-binary people and disabled people? There have been lots of questions in the chat. So I'm grouping some of those questions together. I hope that's okay in the interest of time. Edurne, that question to you. And while you're thinking about your answer, I'm going to direct a question to Manak as well. There was some questions in the chat about groups invading spaces for accessing abortion. So even where services are legal in some countries, providers are refusing to provide the services, and far-right groups or conservative groups are making it very difficult for women to physically enter those spaces. And so the question to Manak was, how do you deal with that? What can we all do to support people who are struggling to access services even where they're legal? So I'm going to turn first to Edurne and then to Manak to answer those questions, please. Edurne, over to you. Thank you.
Gracias por las preguntas, gracias por todo este diálogo tan intenso y tan vívido. En relación a la pregunta, yo creo que la clave está en estos compromisos de los que hablamos, ¿no? En la medida en la que los marcos normativos sean, digamos, respetuosos de los estándares de derechos humanos y la implementación lo sea en la misma medida, podemos generar las mejores condiciones para garantizar los derechos sexuales y reproductivos a todas, todos y todes. Y un poco de eso se trata el desafío, de generar pisos mínimos que nos permitan avanzar hacia, digamos, en cada espacio, en cada lugar y a cada población en la medida de sus necesidades. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Edurne. Thank you ever so much. And Manak, are you still here? I kind of volunteered you for the second question. Thank you.
Hi, sorry, I lost you for a bit, the audio. So I don't know the second question that you pointed at. One was about implementing comprehensive sexuality with diverse communities of young people, particularly around legal and policy barriers, right?
We'd actually moved on to a different question, I'm afraid, but you can answer that one if you prefer. This question was from somebody who's based in a country where abortion services are actually legal, but they're difficult to access because providers aren't providing them, or indeed far-right groups or other groups are preventing physical access to those services, and wondering what we could do about that. But I'd be very happy to hear your thoughts on CSE as well. We've got a couple of minutes left. Thanks.
Sure, I can try and take both. So around abortion, actually, something that we are trying to do specifically is to address sources of sort of research sources of stigma on abortion, particularly around service providers as well as communities, and understand where stigma exactly comes from, and design then outreach to service providers to directly and specifically address those sources of stigma. Religious barriers around this are particularly hard, and in India we are lucky to actually have one, abortion rights, not specifically rights, but abortion access in this whole population control mode. And so I do understand and acknowledge that that is a specific problem where service providers, on account of their religious beliefs, are able to just say no to providing abortion access. I think as young people, as organization working with young people, training with service providers, engaging more and more with service providers on ground is the approach that we take to try and expand the base of service providers who are willing to actually provide these services to young people. So that is something that we are working on in India. Along with that, actually creating crowdsourced lists of abortion providers who are sensitive, and also enabling young people to check quality and rate and recommend service providers on quality are approaches that seem to have worked to get traction amongst other service providers from a business point of view, if not a rights point of view.
Thanks so much. And I'm going to close the Q&A. I'm sorry for those who wrote such great questions that we didn't get to all of them, but I hope you've enjoyed the session so far nonetheless. And I'm going to hand over now, having thanked all of our great panelists and those participating and asking questions, and leave you in the capable hands of Sarah Hendricks and Mabel Bianco, who are going to discuss now where the action coalitions are headed, and how you can become a commitment maker in the amazing coalition that we're building. Generation Equality Forum is but a catalyst. It's going to require all of us to keep things going after the event itself. So Sarah and Mabel, over to you.
Thank you so much, Kate. Not only have you helped facilitate this discussion and dialogue today, but you've kept us going through the last hour and a half in such a dynamic way. At the beginning of today's session, I shared with you the journey of the Action Coalitions. And now we'd like to put a spotlight, a magnifying glass, if you will, on the last part of that journey, from Mexico all the way through to Paris, which will take place between June 30th and July 2nd. So really here, what we'd like to do is just to emphasize what the next steps are and how you can become involved. So on to the next slide, please. To realize this bold and transformative vision of bodily autonomy and sexual and reproductive health and rights that we have discussed today, it will require concrete commitments in order to drive forward change. And in the next slide, what you will see is a way for you to become involved as a commitment maker. Really, to advance this vision will require commitments that are bold, that are game-changing, that are transformative, and that are multi-stakeholder. So what will commitment makers do? Commitment makers essentially will make bold and transformative commitments to one or several of the actions that you heard about today. They will play a catalytic role in supporting the implementation and monitoring of the actions, and they will mobilize others to become involved, to drive energy and momentum into this as a movement overall. And who can become a commitment maker? Well, everybody, quite literally. Women's and feminist organizations, movements, youth-led organizations, civil society actors, governments from the global north and south, UN agencies, international organizations, regional organizations, the private sector, philanthropy, media, local government, you name it. And there are various ways to make a commitment. Commitments can be through policy, through advocacy, programmatic, and of course, financial commitments to drive forward and advance game-changing, measurable actions that are ideally designed together with other stakeholders. I think it's as we come together, we can play a catalytic role in realizing this vision of success that the Action Coalition has set out. And it has been a vision that's been developed through a highly dynamic and iterative process. And one now that it's so critical for more to join in order to, as Françoise highlighted, ensure that we can engage in intentional and active listening to and with each other, to and with feminist movements, activists, and organizations of all kinds in all their diversity. As we're heading towards the launch of the Action Coalitions in Paris, there will be a spotlight on commitments there. And so we encourage all partners to think about what groundbreaking commitments are that you could make. So the transformative vision of bodily autonomy and sexual and reproductive health and rights can be realized. And I'm really excited and super delighted to Mabel Bianco, someone who's well known to the whole community, who is the president of the Fundación para Estudio e Investigación de la Mujer from Argentina, an esteemed core group member and Action Coalition leader. Mabel is here, and Mabel, we would hear about your perspective as we are inviting commitment makers to join this effort. Can you share with us why FAME has become a leader and is seeking to drive forward commitment makers part of this effort overall? Over to you, Mabel.
Muchas gracias. Y bueno, ser un líder significa poder tener ideas claras, propuestas concretas y mucha persistencia en la acción y en el reclamo. Yo presido una organización que tiene 32 años y nuestro primer objetivo fue cómo lograr, tanto en el país como en la Argentina, como en la región y en el mundo, los derechos sexuales y reproductivos para todas las mujeres en todas las condiciones. Y hablo de un país donde hasta la década del 80 avanzados teníamos prohibida la planificación familiar, se llamaba en ese momento, ahora la salud sexual y reproductiva. ¿Se imaginan ustedes eso? Cómo las feministas lo luchábamos, lo pedíamos, los exigíamos, pero nos llevó más. Desde el año 92 hasta el 2002 no conseguimos la ley en nuestro país. Pasamos 4 o 5 proyectos que las feministas junto con las diputadas que eran favorables a estas ideas hacían proyectos y sucumbía hasta que tuvimos una crisis grande en el país que nos hundió en la pobreza y ahí se descubrió la mortalidad materna y la mortalidad infantil y pudimos tener la ley. Pero nos llevó otros tantos años llegar a tener a tener la ley de aborto seguro. Y esto, como dijo antes Edurne, fue la lucha de todas las mujeres feministas y muchos hombres que durante años hacíamos las manifestaciones. Éramos muy poquitos, pero seguimos, hasta que en el 2015 hubo un quiebre. Y el quiebre fue la indignación por las muertes que dijimos ni una más. No queríamos más muertes por violencia. Y en esas muertes por violencia estaba también el negar un aborto a una mujer y sobre todo a una niña que había sido abusada. Y eso teníamos los miles de niñas menores de 15 años abusadas, violadas y que eran obligadas a ser madres. Entonces, ser líder es tener objetivos, tener ideas claras y persistir. La lucha es dura, la lucha es difícil, pero hay que persistir, porque si no persistimos, no vamos a lograrlo. Y ahí sí digo, esta coalición de acción nos permite que ahora sumemos muchas más voluntades de gobiernos, de organizaciones de mujeres, de organizaciones de jóvenes, de derechos humanos, de organizaciones filantrópicas, del sector privado, grande y chico, que se sume a esta voluntad, porque necesitamos que los derechos sexuales y reproductivos nos permitan a todas las personas poder elegir y ser realmente lo que queremos en nuestra vida. Entonces, esto que decimos, decidir sobre nuestro cuerpo, parece egoísta. No, es algo que necesita la sociedad para su salud, porque ser madre obligadamente no nos ayuda en ninguna forma a nadie. Así que juntémonos, comprometámonos y a esto los invitamos. De aquí a París, 3 meses donde tenemos que ser una avalancha. Hoy somos 50, 60, 70, allá tenemos que ser 400, 500, 600. Así que invito a todos los países, los gobiernos, las organizaciones de las mujeres, de los jóvenes, los grupos filantrópicos, el sector privado, ayúdennos, júntense, exprésense y comprométanse, porque eso es lo importante. Un compromiso chiquito es mucho y ayuda a que se cumpla el gran compromiso que queremos para lograr estos 50 millones de mujeres que gocen de sus beneficios. Nada más, y las esperamos en París con todos esos compromisos y siendo esa avalancha, que no entremos en un Zoom, que seamos muchas más.
Muchas, muchas, muchas gracias, Mabel, por estas palabras tan inspiradoras. Y también quiero dar las gracias a todos y todas y todes los ponentes y todos los participantes y las participantes en esta sesión. Many, many thanks to all of the speakers. And please don't forget to go and look at the draft blueprint in the virtual booth. You can comment, you can see the details. We want to hear from you. Merci beaucoup, muchas gracias. And we will continue in this process of movement building and defending bodily autonomy and sexual and reproductive health and rights together. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Chao, Mabel.
Chao. Nos vemos en París. Aquí no.